Our scripture reading for this morning comes from the book of Matthew, chapter 6, verses 1 through 6 and verses 16 through 21. Be careful that you don't practice your religion in front of people to draw their attention. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father who is in heaven. Whenever you give to the poor, don't blow your trumpet as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, so that they may get praise from people. I assure you, that's the only reward they'll get. But when you give to the poor, don't let your hand know what your right hand is doing, so that you may give to the poor in secret. Your Father, who sees what you do in secret, will reward you. When you pray, don't be like hypocrites. They love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners, so that people will see them. I assure you, that's the only reward they'll get. But when you pray, go to your room, shut the door, and pray to your Father who is present in that secret place. Your Father who sees what you do in secret will reward you. And when you fast, don't put on a sad face like the hypocrites. They distort their faces so people will know they are fasting. I assure you that they will have their reward. When you fast, brush your hair and wash your face. Then you won't look like you are fasting to people, but only to your Father, who is present in that secret place. Your Father, who sees in secret, will reward you. Stop collecting treasures for your own benefit on earth, where moth and rust eat them, and where thieves break in and steal them. Instead, collect treasures for yourselves in heaven, where moth and rust don't eat them, and where thieves don't break in and steal them. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Here ends the lesson. May God transform understanding into action. Amen.
I have rarely known true terror. Only a couple of times in my entire life have I ever been completely, utterly paralyzed with fear. One night, I had just turned the lights out. Lindsay and I were getting into bed, pulled the covers up. I think there was something on the television. We usually leave the TV on in the background as kind of background noise, fall asleep to. And I had just reached that place that you sometimes get in sleep where you almost feel yourself falling, physically falling, just as you hit the pillow. Just that feeling of, okay, I'm going under. I'm falling asleep. And a shriek shattered the night, and I leapt up. And it was Lindsay, and she was flailing, and I was flailing because she was flailing. And I didn't know what we were flailing at, but we were both flailing. We were doing a really darn good job of it. I fell out of the side of the bed, and I reached for the light, and then I remembered that the light was sort of across the room. So I stumbled over, and I hit the light, and Lindsay is sort of standing up, on the pillow of the bed, looking around, and then I see it. It's a moth. It's a huge moth, and it was in our room. It was like crawling around in the bed with us and had somehow gotten into the room. And just as we were drifting off to sleep, I guess Lindsay's face was kind of warm, and the moth thought, ooh, nice. What was that? And she leaps up, and I leap up, and we fall, and the rest is history. But then we were angry because it was just a moth. We felt silly. It's just a moth. It's not a big deal. Get it out. So it's the middle of the night, and we're chasing the moth out of the bedroom. We have a window, so we've opened the window, and we're like sweeping with a broom to try to sort of, just get out, just get out. Finally, the moth gets out. We close the window. We turn the light off. We get back in bed. And all I can think is that a moth I'm hearing? All night, I couldn't get over it. I just kept thinking another one was going to land on my face. Thankfully, it didn't happen. But I've rarely known terror like that moment. What is this thing? What is it going to do? moth, and then I just felt silly. The scripture lesson this morning uses moths and rust and thieves and all kinds of vivid imagery so that Jesus can communicate a lesson that's, I think, very important for us to learn at the start of Lent. It's helpful for us to get all of our ducks in a row when we begin the Lenten practice. We actually read this passage on Wednesday night at the Ash Wednesday service. Not the whole section, but a chunk of this text we read as a way to explore what it means to start Lent. We put ashes on our face on Ash Wednesday, if that's a tradition you've ever observed. We typically use the palm fronds from the previous year's Palm Sunday so that our commitment to the practice this year takes on a cyclical nature and we have a sort of continuity with all of the lessons we've learned in the past. Because we don't ever really stop learning or growing or trying. And so we have a kind of thread that connects us all throughout our life. The ashes from the previous year mark our face at the start of this year as we begin or re-begin our commitment to doing a little bit better as we anticipate Easter. For Jesus, though, it's not a liturgical season. He's not specifically talking about Lent. He's talking in a broader sense about values, where we place our emphasis, what matters most to us. And so Jesus is essentially saying, very simply, there's hypocrisy in the world, and you're very aware of it. You know it when you see it, so don't do that. If you think you can fix fire with fire, don't do that. Don't match someone else's self-righteousness with your own, for example. If someone else is acting like a know-it-all, don't try to out-know-it-all them. It doesn't make it any better. I've learned this the hard way. I've embarrassed myself shamefully before because I failed to learn that lesson. Honestly, not even that long ago, I've embarrassed myself because I failed to acknowledge that just because someone else goes, hard doesn't mean I have to go hard. Just in return, just because someone fires at me doesn't mean I have to fire a barrage back. I can just let it be. Again, hypothetically, it's a practice. So Jesus is reminding them that there are forms of hypocrisy in the world. There are forms of social capital that depend on a perception of being righteous, and you shouldn't do that. But there's more going on in this passage. If you've been attending our centering prayer meetings on Tuesday night, you'll recall, if you were at the first meeting in particular, we actually read this passage there as well. Father Thomas Keating, who developed the centering prayer practice over many years, uses the start of this passage, the bit about going into your closet and closing the door and praying in secret, as kind of a foundational text for the practice of centering prayer, which essentially involves, entering a quiet space, going sort of internal rather than concentrating on all these external distractions and pulling all of this stuff away. For Father Keating, he actually refers to this section of the text as an example of what he calls cascading levels of silence, which I just love the way that sounds. Cascading levels of silence. Which is to say that with time, over time, and repeated practice, our minds and our hearts get quieter, get, let's say, less distracted. It becomes easier for us, with repeated practice of something like centering prayer, for example, to clear away the clutter and focus on what's most important. And that's a really, really beautiful thing. The first time you do centering prayer, maybe it's kind of difficult because you realize just how much your mind is going. We talked about this afterward with the group on the first night. Some folks expressed that it was really difficult to know what to do with their thoughts when they were aware they had them. Or when they suddenly became aware they didn't have any thoughts, what do I do next? This is an ongoing thing, and you get a little better at it each day. But it's not just centering prayer. This principle applies to all aspects of life. The more we practice clearing away the distractions and the clutter and the stuff that really doesn't matter, the stuff that's really not essential, the closer we get to what is essential. And the easier it is for us to access and remember what is essential. What I think is interesting, too, about this passage, it was something that struck me reading it this week, is that Jesus, and I'm not sure we always pick up on this message in this text, Jesus is not trying to offer a solution to the problem of impermanence. He identifies that things in life are often impermanent, but what he offers in response is not a solution to make things permanent. What he offers in response is a mental habit, a practice, a way of thinking that helps us remember that things are impermanent and keeps us from getting too unhelpfully attached to them. The problem, in other words, and this is something that as human beings, or at least I think we tend to struggle with it quite a bit. I know I struggle with it quite a bit. My fault, my tendency, my habit, is to blame moths and rust. In other words, to blame the things that make life impermanent, or to blame the things that take my power away just a little bit. Moths and rust, the impersonal forces of life that wear away at the things that we've built. The impersonal forces of life that throw curveballs at us when we get up on a Monday morning and we think it's going to be a quiet day, and then you get a phone call and you're like, nope, not going to be a quiet day after all. Or maybe it's that email in your inbox when you check your cell phone that morning. But by developing a habit of non-attachment, at least non-attachment in the material sense, we're able to kind of go beyond what we see and hear and feel materially, which we can sometimes trust too much or put too much value on, and we can see beyond to something that matters a little bit more. But the fault isn't the fault of moths and rust. Moths and rust are just doing what they do. Things change. We celebrated our anniversary this week. It's a really special time. 163 full years of service. We are now embarking on year 164. That's insanity, folks. That's crazy to me. 164 years of history. Not in this building necessarily, but this congregation. We all have those days. I won't say it's how young you feel. I feel like that would make it worse. It's incredible to think about the sheer number of changes that this church has undergone, the level of crisis that this church has dealt with in the past, the number of times we thought, and I'll actually talk about this, I'm not going to mention it in the sermon, but I'll mention it during the offertory. The number of times we thought, this is it, this is the last offering we're ever going to be able to take up because we're down to the wire. And we managed. Again and again and again. The church is still here. But the thing is, the church doesn't look anything like it used to look. It doesn't function anything like it used to function. And in order for this church to still be here for year 164 and beyond, it had to be willing to change. It had to make peace, in other words, with rust and moths, and even the occasional thief. We've had to deal with the impermanent, squishy, scary nature of life. But what's interesting is I think with a practice like what Jesus is encouraging us to do, just this mental attitude of non-attachment to material things can help us move beyond thinking that this is enough, that we made it, we've arrived, we've done all we need to do, and we can just stop now. We've got a legacy, we've secured it, we've got ours. Let's sit back and let someone else do the work. But non-attachment, and in particular this idea of storing up treasures in heaven, says, no, that's the beauty of the risk. That's the beauty of the journey that you're on, is that you're probably not going to end up where you think you're going to end up. And the only way to have that happen to you, to have that experience, to go on that adventure, is to be receptive to it. That's important too. Is to kind of invite it, is to welcome it into your life. Maybe that involves a daily practice. Maybe you get up in the morning and just say a short prayer of, all right, what do you got for me? It doesn't have to be articulate. It doesn't have to be poetic. Sometimes it's just acknowledging that, all right, I'm ready. Don't know what's up for today, but I'm ready. Not going to get too attached to my own ego, hard as that might be. I'm not going to put all of my eggs for success in one basket and assume that my whole existence and my whole worth is made or broken on these set of particular material accomplishments that I've made today or haven't made today, which I then use as a rubric to praise or beat up on myself when I feel like I'm either good enough or not good enough, as ever the case may be. I'm not going to play that game with myself. Instead, I'm going to store up treasures in heaven. Throughout the rest of this Lenten season, we'll be looking at ways to do that. Ways to kind of cut the crap in a way. Look at the distractions, look at the noise, look at the static, and excise some of those things. And what we excise over the course of Lent this year will be different for each of us, I'm sure. There will be some commonalities, some universal things, but each of us is going to go on a slightly different journey, and that's okay. And like the moth, that we realized actually wasn't as scary as we thought it was. Once we stopped flailing out, trying to fix the problem without knowing how, or even really having a full understanding of what the problem is. We learned moths aren't so bad. I urge you, friends, this week, as always, store up treasures in heaven. It may take a little practice, but it's worth it. Even or especially if we're all a little rusty. Amen.